Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. No comment. Peter Quint was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis when he was 3 years old. Peter is a familiar face to many of us. He's a member of our community here. This is him at age 3 when he received that diagnosis. His legs were in so much pain that he could barely walk as a child. But at least at the time, the only medical advice to avoid a wheelchair was to do as much walking as possible. So over the course of his adolescence, his father took walks with him nearly every single day. Now Peter is 71 years old. He lives with a few residual deformities to this day, but he walks. And he has never spent a day of his life in a wheelchair. 71. He's old. And most Sundays, at some point in our worship gathering, I will glimpse Peter right here on the front row with his arms stretched up high, belting out off-key lyrics at the top of his lungs, jumping up and down like a child. An old man, 7 decades into a medical condition that was meant to land him in a wheelchair, jumping up and down like a child in worship. Peter's highly intelligent. He was a physician for 43 years. He has saved countless lives. He has relieved so many families of grief that was coming their way with the sharpness of his intellect. Peter is highly respected. He's one of the elders of our church. He's a leader of leaders, a reviewer of budgets, a settler of conflicts. This old man, still suffering from a debilitating diagnosis, jumping up and down, shouting out song lyrics in an otherwise ordinary worship gathering, on an otherwise ordinary Sunday, at an otherwise ordinary church. What do you call that? Foolishness? Naivete? Personality? Jesus called it purity of heart. Beatitudes, the last will be first. We're picking apart Jesus' surprising and compelling introduction to the Sermon on the Mount at the moment. Last week, we got started with the poor in spirit. And if you missed last week, that is essential context for the understanding of the whole of the Beatitudes. So I would strongly encourage you to go back on our podcast and pick up what you missed. But this is week 2, and what you probably immediately noticed is we're not going through the Beatitudes in the same order that Jesus rattled them off. That's because we've got a couple of guest speakers coming to join us later on in the teaching series that I wanted to preach on particular portions of this text. And that'll work just fine for us because the order of the Beatitudes is very important when you're taking them in as a whole, but it's actually not important when you're picking them apart one by one. So up for today is blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. I imagine pure is the word that immediately jumps off the page to you first, and you probably don't particularly like it. Pure is often used as a polite stand-in for sheltered these days, like, oh yeah, he's just really pure, by which we usually mean he's innocent, he's sheltered, he's unexposed to reality, which he will inevitably confront just a touch later than average. Or maybe you grew up in some version of Christian legalistic purity culture, and so the use of this word, even if it comes off the lips of Jesus, is stained with a coercive take on biblical sexuality. Or it could be simply that pure seems to mean absolute. It leaves no room for nuance, no gray. A pure heart sounds to you like one without a shred of mixed motive, one that exudes perfect conduct, one that has somehow made it through a corrupted world unscathed, and that might sound unattainable or even dishonest to you, like a simplified Disney script version of what you know to be a complex, real-life story. And so if pure lands at first with a bitter taste in your mouth, you should know that it's not the word that your attention should be drawn to first. And it's not a word that should be defined by your past experience, but rather by Jesus' present promise. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. The Christian philosopher Dallas Willard taught that for anyone to change, whether they wanted to learn to garden or to surf or to speak a foreign language, for anyone to change or grow or learn, 3 things were required: vision, intention, and means, famously referred to as Willard's VIM model for human formation. All personal change or growth begins with a vision. You've got to be able to imagine yourself as who you want to become. This is the source of every New Year's resolution, right? I imagine myself living my days more energetic by getting 8 hours of sleep at night. Or I imagine myself more cultured after hiking Machu Picchu, or more impressive on the beach at spring break with 6-pack abs. I get a vision of who I want to become. An imagined picture of myself as that person. That's where any kind of change, any kind of formation, whether it's spiritual, emotional, psychological, or physical, that's where it begins. Secondly, you've got to set your intention. Simply mean you have to choose to do what is necessary to then become the vision. You got to look at the calendar, set the dates, and plan the route if you're going to hike Machu Picchu. You got to commit yourself to a diet and exercise plan if you're going to look like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson with your shirt off on the beach. And then finally, you need to have the means to make this vision a reality. You've got to have what it takes to live out your intention. To summit Machu Picchu, you're going to need the cash to book the flights to Peru. You got to get the proper footwear, and you probably need to use your charisma to talk your more experienced hiker friend into joining you. To wow on the beach at spring break, you need access to the foods on your diet plan, the gym where you're going to perform millions of sit-ups, and the grit to follow through after the inspiration is worn off. The reason that you are immediately put off by purity is because of the human tendency to bypass the vision and skip straight to the means. Just think about your friend for a second. I mean, the friend of yours that was gluten-free a year ago and now they're baking sourdough and they talk about their starter like it's a new puppy. Or the friend that used to always eat at Taco Bell and now they're just going on and on about the benefits of powdered greens. Or about that family, the one that was all PPS is best, I don't want to shelter my kids, and now they're in a private Montessori Christian classical collage academy, and they're thinking about starting their own homeschool because that's too progressive. Now, obviously I'm kidding. These are all caricatures. I'm just saying the point is that we all buck against the means if we haven't first caught the vision. Right? Saving money and blistering my feet isn't compelling. A selfie at the summit of Machu Picchu is compelling. Living off raw almonds and sitting on a core exercise ball at my desk isn't compelling. Impressing on the beach is compelling. The trouble with the way that most of us read the ethical teachings of Jesus is we tend to skip straight to the means without ever first catching the vision. And so the 6th beatitude is best read and certainly best lived backwards. So let's begin at the end with the vision. For they will see God. French poet Antoine de Saint-Exupéry famously said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the endless vastness of the sea. We are all people of longing, and our longing leads us to everything that we truly pursue. Let your longing lead you. It reminds me of a woman at a well in the heat of the day in Samaria. A woman whose deepest longing was to be the beloved, to discover herself treasured, cherished, chosen, loved by another. A longing that she chased into relationship after relationship, disappointment after disappointment, wound after wound, a longing unfulfilled, and then a stranger sits down next to her, Jesus. And he gently probes, he asks her questions, he draws her out, he kindly exposes her deepest longing. And then says, if you only knew the gift of God, you would ask, and I'd give you living water. God longs to satisfy your deepest longing. God longs to become your vision. And this encounter with Jesus causes her to leave her jar right there at the well and run back to the village, right back to the very people and circumstances that she was escaping by coming to the well in the heat of the day. Right back to the very life that she was avoiding, to say, come and see the man who told me everything I ever did. Come and see God. When Jesus used the phrase pure in heart, he was directly quoting Psalm 24. And when you trace this promise back to that ancient prayer, it's obvious that to see God is a reference back to Eden, when Adam and Eve talked face to face with God. The motivating promise undergirding purity of heart isn't a spotless moral report card. This is about recovering the ease with which we see, hear, and run to God. That's what was robbed by sin. Adam and Eve overnight went from walking with God to hiding from God. That's what Jesus' kingdom restores. The vision Jesus is offering here is the recovery of your truest self, most alive, most free, most full of joy, most present, most content, most blessed, Makarios. Rich Villodas says, the pure in heart are known more for their God attentiveness than their sin avoidance. Can I be honest, like really honest? Is this a safe space? I can't tell. There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about for some time now, and it's this. I don't get zoo lights. I just don't. What is the draw of paying a hiked up charge to go to the zoo at night when it's too dark to see any of the animals, which is sort of the whole thing a zoo offers, just to look at Christmas lights like, you know, the ones you see for free on every house you passed on the way to zoo lights. When I moved to Portland, everyone told Kirsten and I, you guys got to take your kids to zoo lights. They're going to love it. It's the best around the holidays. So we did. And then 2 hours later, we're walking out of the zoo, out a bunch of cash, entirely soaked, because it's an outdoor event in December in Portland, looking at one another like the locals had just pranked us. And then, this year, I go to visit my in-laws for the holidays, and they bought tickets to zoo lights in Nashville. And we were dry, but other than that, it was an identical experience. I was hungry, couldn't see a single animal. I was looking everywhere for an elusive restroom, outdoors somewhere in the dark, and playing real life Where's Waldo, trying to keep track of my toddlers amidst a sea of toddlers in the dark. But my mother-in-law had bought these tickets, so I was pretending to be all in. And then 2.5 hours later, we finally saw the exit, the one I'd been longing for, like a mirage in the desert. And we're just about to cross the threshold into the parking lot that represented freedom. And she says, oh, the carousel. We forgot the carousel. And I could feel the bottom drop out of my stomach. We walked a full mile back to get to this carousel. And then this happened. It's Hank and Simon, 2 of my 3 boys. Pure joy. You know, a carousel is wonder for a child and monotony for an adult. It's just the same thing over and over, just up and down, round and round. G.K. Chesterton says, it's exactly that sense of wonder and joy that we glimpse in children that allows us to see God. Because children have abounding vitality, because they are in spirit fierce and free, therefore they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, do it again, and the grown-up person does it again until he is nearly dead. For grown-up people, are not strong enough to exult in monotony. But perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun, and every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but he's never tired of making them. It may be that he has an eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. Wendell Berry is one of the most celebrated and accomplished writers in American history. He's a classic underdog story, movie script waiting to happen. McConaughey's Oscar if Spielberg would ever just sit down and write the script. Berry grew up on a farm in rural middle of nowhere Kentucky, farmland that had been in his family for 7 generations. 7 generations of farmers on the same patch of dirt, and then Wendell, who went to Stanford and then a fellowship under literary legend and Pulitzer Prize winner Wallace Stegner, then traveled to France as a Guggenheim Fellow to learn under the international greats. Then he moved to New York to teach literature at NYU. All this happened still in his 20s. And then on his 30th birthday, he moved back to Kentucky and took up the farming of his father and became Generation 8 in his family story. Wait. What? Why? Well, because on his prestigious ascent, Wendell noticed something happening to him. He was growing less and less awestruck, less and less wonder-filled, less filled with joy. He was a young success story, but he was growing older than his heavenly Father, to borrow the words of Chesterton. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, Jesus once asked, yet forfeit their soul? Berry took that seriously, and he decided he'd rather lose his career than his soul. He was more willing to lose success by the standards of this world's expiring kingdom than to lose vision by the standards of Jesus' eternal kingdom. So he went back home, laid down his pen, and picked up a plow because he wanted to see God. Wendell Berry went on to publish over 80 books from that Kentucky farm. He is a poet, essayist, novelist, and a farmer. In 2010, he was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Obama for outstanding achievements in history, literature, education, and cultural policy. Among his most celebrated works, Berry published 2 volumes of Sabbath poems, which were written over the course of 35 years. That's just shy of 2,000 poems. He developed a prayer ritual of walking the farmland every Sabbath morning, asking God to open his eyes to see, and then scribbling a few prayerful words about seeing God in the ordinary, familiar place that he worked the other 6 days of the week. Walking the same ground, the farm that he grew up on, worked all week, the land that he knew like the back of his hand, that's where he met God. It's where he saw God. Just the same thing over and over again. Up and down, round and round, like a carousel. Wonder for a child, but monotony for an adult, unless we find a way of growing younger as we grow older. Unless we let Jesus restore our fading vision. Sigmund Freud said there's just 2 categories of people that he couldn't find a way to pin down in his psychological categories. 2 types of people that he couldn't quite figure out. Their behavior mirrored one another, but they defied everything that he had come to know as human nature. And they are saints and poets. Of course they are. Because saints and poets have at least this much in common. They haven't lost their vision. They can still see God in the ordinary of their life as it is today. They can behold God in the wonder of his creation. The pure in heart are known more for their God attentiveness than their sin avoidance. To see God in the ordinary, to recover this prayerful sort of vision that I'm describing, has been labeled mysticism in the Christian tradition. And that's a term that makes a whole lot of people nervous because it sounds pretty hocus pocus. And to be entirely fair, there have been some utterly beautiful and other entirely heretical writings from various mystics. But the very core of Christian mysticism is just a desire to experience all that I already believe. It's just the conviction that God's kingdom is available to me here and now. It's a growing ability to see traces of God in the ordinary world and a purifying of my heart and recovery of my vision. Wendell Berry put it this way: I take literally the statement in the Gospel of John that God loves the world. So of course, the God who loves the world would love me to rejoice at a string of unexpected sunny days right in the heart of January. Or at the beautiful death of the winter and the promise of new life that's every spring. Or at the withered hands of the beggar who have a unique thumbprint that bears the image of a uniquely loving, knitting together creator. The God who loves this world is the God who unconditionally, inexhaustibly loves me, so of course he wants me to see his loving gaze anywhere and everywhere that I direct my own. It's later in this very sermon that Jesus will go on to say, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light, but if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. Jesus makes the claim that your vision is probably the best barometer of your spiritual life. And the sort of vision that Jesus wants to help you and I recover is that of a child's, that way of seeing that's wrung out of us as we grow older than God in this corrupted world. Unless you change and become like little children, Jesus said, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. All change, all formation, it starts with a vision. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. The English see is the Greek horao, and in Matthew's original it means seeing, but not glimpsing. It means more like gazing. It literally translates to pay attention to. And that's important because in the words of Mary Oliver, attention is the beginning of devotion. You become like whatever you pay attention to. The way you see is who you will become. Seeing God as he truly is purifies my heart. According to a Baylor University study, nearly 50% of Americans believe that God is critical and harsh. Only 23% identify God as loving and generous. Wendell Berry is making his way around his farmland every Sunday morning, but he's doing a whole lot more than just romantically thinking about trees. He's recovering the truth about God that's going to define the way that he relates to God the other 6 days of the week. So sure, this absolutely is about wonder and joy and awe, but it's about a whole lot more than that too. We're talking about the formation of your soul, about who you become and how you relate to others. Because psychologically speaking, awe is inseparably tied to compassion. Studies from UC Berkeley had some participants look at a grove of eucalyptus trees and others look at the side of a concrete building. And then unbeknownst to the participants in the study, they staged individuals in need of help on the way out from the study. And those who had stared at the eucalyptus trees were far more likely statistically to stop and help the person in need. Isn't that fascinating? That psychologically speaking, the wonder and awe with which we see the world is a deciding factor in the love that we offer to others or don't. The vision that Jesus is offering in the sixth beatitude is you growing older and wiser without forfeiting the eyes through which you see the world and act with compassion. As you increasingly learn to see God in your actual life as it is today, God then partners with you and increasingly aids you to see yourself as he made you first. This isn't only about the recovery of a particular way of praying. It's about the recovery of all those little pieces of you that are littered behind the years of your life. This is about the recovery of the family of origin pain that you still live in patterns of, or the insecurity you confused with safety in high school, or the ego inflation that you defined success by and are still living and chasing. The vision that Jesus offers is piecing back together your true self and restoring you to an awake and alive way of seeing, living, and being in this world. The vision is Wendell Berry on his farm. The vision is you on your way to the office tomorrow, or to drop off your kids at daycare, or to the next meeting or the next class. It's you dragging a roller bag through PDX or dragging a couple toddlers through the grocery store. It's you walking the dog in the morning or commuting home in the evening. It is you, alive, content, present, joyful, because this day, this person, these circumstances, this chapter in my story is enough because I see God in it. The vision is you in your ordinary life as it is today, imperfect and incomplete, recovering a true way of seeing, that way you knew before the serpent had his way with you. It's you in your life as it is today, finally looking for joy where it can be found and sustained. In one of his poems, Wendell Berry writes, "There are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places." The life that you are living today, imperfect and incomplete, it is sacred to God. Every moment of it, charged, packed with eternity. It's sacred to God. Is your life sacred to you? Or is it desecrated? Like in your current perspective, is your life enough? Is it enough for you? Or is it not? And are you showing that it's not by the way that you're not entirely present within it? Because you're always preoccupied by the future that you're planning or the past that you're still reliving? Or are you improving your life rather than enjoying it? Or maybe you're sleepwalking through it instead of living it. Or it could be that you're putting yourself instead of Jesus at the center of it. See, the vision here is you in your life as it is today, imperfect and incomplete, discovering yourself as blessed. Makarios. And blessed not because your circumstances have changed, blessed because your vision has changed. Those who see and participate with the King in establishing the kingdom that never ends are those who learn to see God in the ordinary, imperfect, and incomplete. It's Mary, amid scandal and forced migration and poverty and pregnancy, slowing herself to ponder, to treasure, to see, and then perceiving the magnificent story that God is unfolding in the chaos of her life today. It's Peter exposed by denial and then discovering the magnificent story of God is in fact about the unfolding of God's mercy, not the unfolding of my perfection. It's Paul imprisoned unjustly, scribbling biblical letters from a prison cell because sure, you can chain up my body, but you can't close my spiritual eyes. It's a friend from my Bridgetown community who has been navigating a really complex and prolonged relational conflict with a very close friend, and it's just been awful. Unresolved tension, tons of legit cause for anxiety, tears of pain, significant hurt. And she shared with me last Tuesday night as we sat together in my living room about jogging on the previous Monday. And as she did, she began to pray the Beatitudes over her life. Blessed are you surrounded by friends to be in conflict with. Blessed are you to have journeyed long enough with a couple of people to have gotten past the surface and into the chaos. Blessed are you to be held by the prayers of others who are companioning your soul so you're not alone. Blessed are you to have a God who reigns and a God who suffers so you can find him here too. And as she prayed, she began to weep. Not tears of pain, tears of encounter, because she was seeing God. Where? In the imperfect, incomplete, ordinary circumstances of her life as it actually is today. What was happening in that moment? Nothing was changing about her circumstances. Everything was changing about her sight. Nothing was changing around her. Everything was changing within her. Her heart was being purified, not by a series of squeaky clean moral decisions, but by the intrusion of Jesus into her imperfect, incomplete life as it is today. And as we sat in my living room, what she was really saying to me was, come and meet the man who told me everything I ever did. Come with me and see God. That's the vision. You want in? Then set your intention. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. In the Bible, a person's heart refers to the totality of their consciousness, their mind, will, and emotions, a person's entire inner world. And pure, if we trace this to its Hebrew root word, can also be translated as purge. In fact, it appears that way in our English translations of the Hebrew Bible and the prophecies of Daniel and Ezekiel. Purity of heart, then, is the long, slow process of sifting through my inner world, picking out and getting rid of every desire that isn't directed solely and entirely toward God. The 18th century Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard gave us, in my opinion, the best and most clear definition. He said, purity of heart is to will one thing. Purity of heart is the pointing of all the desire that is within me at God alone. It's what David prayed in Psalm 27. One thing I ask of the Lord, this only will I seek. To be pure in heart is what Mary was doing at the feet of Jesus while Martha was busy in the kitchen. It's what Jesus meant when he said, seek first my kingdom and I'll take care of all these other things too. It's what Jesus put his finger on when he said, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. Jesus claims that a human being only has the capacity to serve one master at any given time. We only have the capacity to will one thing. So what does it mean to truly intend to recover the childlike vision that sets me free to love? Well, it means confronting another unpopular word, serve. No one can serve two masters. Servant is a terribly unpopular word today. In a post-chattel slavery America, servant evokes the image of an undignifying minimization of my whole person, like a slave who is forced to serve the profit margins of a master. Servant in the Bible, though, is an incredibly popular word. It appears 170 times across every biblical era and literary genre, and sure, it does occasionally refer to an individual's unfortunate social status and identity. Quite often, though, servant is used as a metaphor for defining apprenticeship to Jesus. African American slaves in the colonial American South were forced to serve a cruel master in ways that made them less. Biblical slaves, on the other hand, choose to serve a compassionate and gracious master in ways that make them more. One has nothing to do with the other. So what does it mean to truly intend to recover the childlike vision that sets me free? It means to become a servant of the God who sets me free. So I want to replace the horror of the American enslaved person that has nothing to do with Jesus' invitation with another type of servant who has everything to do with Jesus' invitation, and that is the artist. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, a Hungarian-American psychologist, studied the behavior of a group of Chicago painters over months, trying to look for patterns in their creative process. And there was this one aspect about the creative process that really struck him, and it was this: that despite the intensity of their devotion during the creative process, after it was complete, the artist would put aside his or her project and immediately begin the next one. The ego, which is so central to psychological definitions of human behavior patterns, seemed to have no hold on human creativity whatsoever. The artists didn't gaze triumphantly at their work. They didn't invite others to behold what they had done. They didn't spend any time basking in the glow of their accomplishment. In his own words, when they finished the object, the outcome was not important. You know, one of the unique conundrums about art is that a small-time potter working a wheel alone in a dingy apartment in the evening experiences the exact equivalent amount of joy as Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel. Because art is never about success if it's going to be worth anything at all. It's always about service. The successful artist is the one who learns to lose herself. That's when she has something actually worth giving. And of course, every piece of art doesn't make you think about the artist behind it. It makes you forget about the artist behind it. A great piece of writing doesn't make you think about the author who wrote it. It makes you forget both them and yourself while you're reading it because you're being lost in it. To create is an act of service. It is a losing of myself in service to others through creativity. In the words of Madeleine L'Engle, the novelist who wrote A Wrinkle in Time, and here we blunder into paradox again, for during the creation of any form of art, the artist must die. Death to self. Is there any truer act of service than that? To intend to become pure in heart is to will one thing. It is to willfully serve a master, to serve in the artist sense, joyfully and creatively losing ourselves in self-giving love for another. Jesus, the only master who makes me more rather than makes me less. Jesus' kingdom is unapologetically a call to single-minded devotion. Jesus is saying, I want to call you to a narrowness that will broaden your vision. It's kind of like this. This is the view from the last apartment that I lived in Brooklyn before we moved to Portland. This is a photo that I snapped from the window. Yes, window. There was only one. It was that small. But that was the view. Pretty good, yes? And I can remember this one night in the fall when I was invited to this get-together at this super fancy penthouse apartment in Lincoln Center, just off Central Park. And the views were a whole lot like my own, only much, much better with lots more windows. And this one window, the owner of this apartment had staged a telescope in front of it. And I remember leaning down to look through this telescope, and as I did, I could see the stars that were lit up above the Manhattan skyline. And you know, the thing about the New York skyline is that its glow is so bright, you can't see any of the stars above it with the naked eye. Like 9 out of 10 nights, it's just black above, even when the sky is clear, because the city below is so bright. And this, in my opinion, is the one great drawback to life in a city. That when I gaze at all that I create, I'm tricked into this nearsighted kind of vision, the belief that the world is small and I'm at the center and I'm the master of my own universe. But when I leaned down into that telescope and looked, I could see beyond all that my naked eye was blinded to. I could see how vast God's creation is and how small I am down here in this little apartment. I could see that I am in fact not at the center. I am servant, not master. And that is the invitation of the pure heart. It is narrow your vision. And like a telescope in the heart of Manhattan, by narrowing your vision to Jesus, you will see more, not less. And then finally, the means. 3rd century church father St. Gregory of Nyssa said that the 2 essential marks of spiritual maturity are detachment and childlike confidence in God. Childlike confidence, as in joyfully serving the only one who can make you more, and detachment as in throwing off all those other enslaving masters that make you less. Classically, within church history, this 2-sided coin of spiritual maturity came to be called mortification and prayer. Mortification is a catch-all term for all those spiritual practices that uproot self-love, the way that we starve the ego that robs us of joy in life. And prayer, a catch-all term for that whole category of spiritual practices that direct our attention to God, therefore feeding our souls. Evelyn Underhill then updated the terminology to practices of turning from and practices of turning to. And I like that. I find that really helpful. Those are words I actually use, and it puts a picture in my head of turning from and turning to. The means of detachment is turning from. Medieval philosophy had a dictum that said, every choice is a renunciation. To choose one thing is to turn my back on a whole bunch of others, right? If I choose to order curry in for dinner tonight, I'm willfully choosing not to order tacos, pizza, or sushi. To marry one person is to not marry a whole bunch of others. To have a baby is to close off a whole bunch of other options for what my immediate future could be like. The truth is, most of us are not being robbed of the pure heartedness that sees God because we've devoted ourselves to some dark other solitary master. The truth is, most of us are trying to will many things when we can only really will one. Most of us are attempting to prove Jesus wrong and show that we, in fact, can be devoted to a number of masters all at once. Right? We want to live deeply prayerful lives, and we want to see every Netflix series that gets a little bit of buzz. And we want to cultivate rich, deep, thoughtful souls and wildly successful careers. We want to be generous and compassionate to others while also being comfortable by our own standards. We want to be free from want and have an updated, incredibly stylish wardrobe. Attempting to bow the knee to every longing, we cannot actually live from our depths. The woman at the Samaritan well had to leave her jar there to run back to the village. She had lesser thirst she had to turn from in order to taste living water. There must be a turning from on the other side of every turning to. Artists use the term negative space to refer to all that is not there on the canvas. And a well-trained artist knows that what's not there in a painting is every bit as important as the portions of the canvas the brush touches. A well-trained artist is using every square inch of the canvas, what they paint and what they don't, to help you see through their eyes. Let me show you an obvious example. Do you see how in this piece, what is not there is equally as important as what is there to show you something? Both the turning from and turning to are essential in this image. This is what the Apostle Paul is getting at in 1 Corinthians 6 when he says, I have the right to do anything you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be, wait for it, mastered by anything. That longing that God's been waking up in you today as I've been teaching, it's got competition. So what dulls my vision? What tricks me into the false belief that I am at the center? What do I use to get a counterfeit version of what God wants to give me? Is it the glass of wine I find myself pouring most evenings because I haven't learned the satisfaction of resting in the Spirit? Or might it be the future vacation planning I'm always doing because I can't bear to live in the present? Or the online shopping that I'm constantly scrolling because I've not learned the freedom of contentment? Or like the Samaritan woman, could it be the belovedness I'm chasing in a human relationship when I'm being offered living water by the bridegroom of all creation? Purity of heart is about turning from before it's about what we turn to. God is the creator. He is the original artist of the human soul, and the human soul is his masterpiece. So he's definitely going to work with both color and negative space in every last one of us. The Samaritan woman left her jar. The man in Jesus' parable sold all he had to buy the field where he found heavenly treasure. Zacchaeus took his hands off his earthly possessions to take hold of heavenly riches. And the rich young ruler tried to will many things all at once. He didn't want to let go of all else that he wanted to drag with him into the way of Jesus, and therefore he walked away sad. So what appetite in my life do I have a pattern of being mastered by? Detach yourself. Turn from it. Starve that cheap appetite. It is blinding you to true vision. But don't just starve your want. Also nourish your soul by a practice of turning to. On the other side of the same coin, what makes me grateful, content, satisfied, present? What opens my eyes to see God in my imperfect, ordinary, incomplete life as it is today? Could it be a slow Sabbath walk with a legal pad and a pencil in your hand like Wendell Berry, or maybe a commitment to a regular soul-level conversation with a close friend, or just the ritual of being interrupted by prayer 3 times a day, or a commitment to lay my eyes on Scripture before I lay them on anything else each morning, or a regular environment of service that changes nothing about my circumstances but everything about my perspective, like the shelter or the prison or the after-school program? Might it be a particular relationship in my life that cost me something that I know I'm meant to give away right now? Like the friend that I'm bearing with, or the coworkers that I'm inviting into my faith journey, the neighbors that I've got coming over for Sabbath dinner this week, or the kid that I'm mentoring? What makes me grateful, present, satisfied, and content? What for me is a pathway to blessing, not by the changing of my circumstances, but the changing of my perspective? That, practiced over time, it opens our eyes. It teaches us to see again, to recover that childlike kind of vision, and to grow younger as we grow older. So this week's practice, as we gather around the table in Bridgetown Communities, is to discern in community at the Spirit's invitation what we're meant to turn from and what we're meant to turn to. What God might be inviting me individually into to purify my heart and open up my eyes. That's what we're doing this week. And if you're not in a Bridgetown community, you are leaving so much on the table. You are missing the very heartbeat of who we are as a church. The way in is through Basics, which of course we run 3 times a year. It's coming up next week. We would love you to sign up online and join us. But for today, I'll close with this. Peter Quint is a highly intelligent, phenomenally accomplished, deeply respected old man with a debilitating, immobilizing diagnosis. And yet here he is, Sunday after Sunday, arms stretched high, belting out off-key lyrics, jumping up and down like a child. And maybe Peter's jumping up and down because he's foolish or naive, or a particular personality type, maybe. But maybe he's grown younger than me, younger than most of us. Maybe he's jumping up and down because he has recovered the contentment, wonder, joy, presence. Maybe it's because today is enough for him. Maybe it's because he's pure in heart. Peter Quint is one of the people that I admire most. He's someone that I hope to become increasingly like as I grow older. And that's because as Peter Quint has grown older, he has grown younger. And I hope to as well.